Welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. And today I have a very special guest, Dr. Lauren DiNicenzo, assistant professor at Drexel University's LeBow College of Business. I had the pleasure of meeting her earlier this year, and gosh, what an amazing individual and just incredible leader. She's smart, she's wise, she's intuitive, and she always knows how to frame things in a way that is easy to understand. And I don't think that's just from her students' perspective. That's definitely from mine and our mutual friends. I'm excited to have Lauren on the show. Her focus is how to leverage the knowledge, skills, and abilities of team members and encourage effective team processes through leadership, productive interactions, and supportive environments. And so when I read that and understood that just through talking with her, I'm like, okay, I need to get her on the show so I can break all of that down so that the leaders and the entrepreneurs listening to this show can really take away all that you have to say. So Lauren, without further ado, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much, James. It's a pleasure to be here and excited to have a conversation.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to start with a little bit of rapid fire. So these questions are designed for the audience to get to know you quick and in a hurry. So we'll start with the first one, and that is, where were you born and where were you raised?
I was born in Smithtown, New York, which is on Long Island, and raised in Comac, which is just down the road.
Okay, cool. What is a philosophy that you live by?
You can't steal second with your foot on first.
Okay, I like that. That's good. What is your definition of failure?
Gosh, that's a great one. Failure is an opportunity to learn and to grow.
Cool. What do you want to see more of in the world?
Compromise and agreement.
Now more than ever. What is a game-changing book that you've read recently or just in the past that you feel the listeners should take a peek at?
One of my favorite books has been The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Really great book and great insights.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a really solid book. Solid piece of advice that you have received in your life that has proved to be worth way more than any amount of value, like monetary value.
I think a simple one, just don't take things too seriously. Life is too short and you've got to have fun, and you create a lot of meaningful relationships along the way, but you got to don't take things too seriously.
Okay, cool. And then last one, what did you have to give up or sacrifice in order to get to where you are now?
I'd say time from family, time from friends, to be able to do what I'm doing today.
So going off of that real quick, I think a lot of people listening and leaders in general, and this is my kind of perspective, I want to get your perspective on this. In order to be really effective at what you do, there's a certain time allotment that you have to put into the craft if you want to develop any sort of mastery. And with that mastery comes, I believe, the sacrifice, and sacrifice with your relationships. Do you agree with that time sacrifice? There's a lot more than people think, the responsibility that leaders have to understand their teams, to know the vision, to execute the strategy, all of those factors. That doesn't just happen through intuition, that happens through building and cultivating and practicing. So do you think enough leaders know that going into the position that they want? And if so, or if not, how can we begin talking about that more? Because I don't think it's talked about enough.
That's a great question, because leadership development is not something that happens overnight. I mean, I've done a lot of different courses, executive trainings, and I say, if anyone were to come in and tell you at the end of today's session or at the end of this class, you will be a better leader, that is just not true. It takes time. You've got to take everything in, absorb it, and see how it works for you. And the best leaders and the best teams plan. They understand who they're working with, what it is that they're doing, because even the same team with a different kind of objective or task can be very different, right? And you have to learn how to adapt. And I immediately go to sports and think about, some of the great coaches that we've seen. And they're not always, they can be really great with the team they're coaching at the time. And we've seen a lot of college football coaches move to the NFL, and they were great in college, but once they get to the NFL, it's the same game of football,
Right.
but there's so many different things around them that if they're not planning and strategizing and thinking who they're with and what they have to do, they're not going to be successful. So I couldn't agree more with what you said, that leaders really need to think about and be purposeful with what it is they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think most leaders fumble? Like, what do you think they get wrong when leading a team? If you've seen some commonality, some common threads.
Yeah, so the way I approach teams and leading teams is that you don't always get to choose who you work with. So oftentimes you're just thrown together with a group of people, and you've got to make it work. You have to figure out what it is you're going to do. And so I think that leaders who go in with a one-size-fits-all approach and they say, here's what works best for me, and here's my leadership style, you can't always impose that on the people that you work with. You have to understand who they are, right? We're all motivated for our own reasons. And if, as leaders, we don't understand how our team members are motivated, what brings them to work every day, why are they here, right? If we don't understand those things, we're not going to be successful. So taking that one-size-fits-all approach is just never the right thing to do, I would say. And you have to be willing to be uncomfortable and adapt.
Yeah. Have you seen, so success is interesting, right? Because everyone has their own definition of it. If we're using success in the terms of financial gain, and a company, let's just say in an example, a leader of a company that only cares about the bottom line and not really the care of the employees or the culture or whatever, and just demands more productivity. And let's say, you're talking with someone that has that type of view, and then you say, you need to understand your team. And he's like, well, I understand them to a certain extent, and they're producing, and year after year, we keep growing. What would you say to that leader?
I would say maybe you're able to meet your bottom line now, but in, a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, right? Because the best businesses, if you let's just step back, you look at the Fortune 500, right? And you look at the companies that were on there from the beginning, and you look at the companies that are still there now. I haven't looked recently this year, and things certainly may have changed with everything going on, but we were down to, I think, around 27 of those original Fortune 500 are still there, right? And so things that make you successful in the short term don't always equate to success in the long term. And so you have to be thinking about, what's my next move? What's going to take me further? And what we see in a lot of the research that I do is it's those relationships, it's understanding others that drives you ahead of those who are just focused on the bottom line. Because you're going to be able to meet your longer term targets. And we know that people feel better a part of teams as well when they're satisfied and they feel heard and understood. That's really the difference between just a team that performs and a high performance team that can really sustain itself over time.
So that's cool. I like how you just said that. The difference between a performing team and a high performing team is the sustainability factor, or at least that's one main component of it.
Absolutely. And that's really the focus of a lot of what I do, is trying to shift this mindset of, let's think about the bottom line, or meeting our quota, or doing whatever needs to get done, versus doing it so that people on the team feel empowered. Right? That's one of the biggest things that's come out in my research, is the incredible relationship between empowerment and performance. And when we say performance, both task, the numbers, but also how people feel, because we know it runs on a cycle. If I'm working with you, James, on one task and we have an awesome experience together, I'm excited to do the next, just as we've worked in the past, and I was super excited to come here and talk with you today. But if we had a negative experience together, I may say, no, I don't want to engage with you further, or I'm not going to put in 100% the next time around. So that's really
Right.
where we see those longer term benefits.
Have you found a way to quantify the feeling component of this type of work, of building the relationships, establishing the trust, listening, making sure that people feel psychologically safe? I've always struggled to quantify that because it could be subjective, and then the metrics maybe can shift so quickly. How do you craft that narrative? And I'm asking selfishly, and I think other people would want to know that too. It's like, I know that emotion is important. I know that feeling good is healthy, and it's important for my culture. But like, how do I measure that?
Gosh, that I get asked that question a lot because it's easy to put a number on something, but how do you do it to emotion?
Exactly.
And so in the research that I do, and in our field of organizational behavior,
Hmm.
we've tried to come up with ways of capturing these different kinds of emotions. And like you said, they're all perceptions.
Right.
The way you perceive how you feel empowered on the team might be different from how I feel empowered on the team. But we know that all of these feelings through research are made up of different kinds of dimensions. So for example, empowerment. Right?
Hmm.
Empowerment is made up of dimensions of meaning, impact, competence. And so if we know that these are the components that make up empowerment, we can devise questions to ask people, how do you feel? And we can ask everyone on the team, so we can look for agreement between those responses. If we get high levels of agreement, that tells us one thing. If there are varying levels, we have a lot of dispersion. You feel really empowered and I don't. Right? That's another way that we can look at and diagnose how we want to move forward. Maybe there are differences in how our leader is treating you versus me. And then the issue becomes, well, why is that?
Hmm.
But there are things that exist, ways of quantifying what these different emotional facets and feelings in our teams are. And so we can take assessments and quantify them. And part of my research is we then take those and we create these regression equations and we say, all right, well, if you feel this empowered, what does that mean? How much does that predict how well you perform or how satisfied you feel with your team? So we can start to do that mathematically to look at the associations to understand, well, where do we need to put a little bit more pressure on
Hmm.
to help things get better?
Hmm. So empowerment, if like empowerment was our dresser and like the individual drawers, which those are meaning, impact, and competence. Did I hear that
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so as a leader, and let's say as a leader of a team of, let's say, 25 people, I want to make sure that my team has deep meaning for the work that they do, like the why behind it, that they are clear on the impact that their job or their responsibility has on the client or the department or the company, and then make sure that they're receiving the training and the information to make sure that they feel comfortable about executing what's expected. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I missed the fourth one there. It's
Okay.
autonomy. So we
Mhm.
feel like we have some leeway, we have flexibility in how we do our work as well.
Mm. Yeah, autonomy is huge. Because then if that's not there, then they can be micromanaging or to feel this sense of like you're breathing down my neck, which maybe will not allow that person to feel as expressive or creative or innovative because they feel like they're being controlled.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
and there's been a lot, again, from this perspective that I have, that you can't always choose who you work with, and so you got to make it work. That there are times where you might be a leader of a team and people are telling you, empower the people that you work with, right? Because if they feel meaning and autonomy and impact and competent, they're going to do better work. But I've heard a lot of people say, well, my people, this is a new person on the team. I don't know what they're capable of, right? Am I just supposed to blindly empower everyone and give them some latitude and give them some freedom? And so my advice there is usually you need to selectively empower, right? You don't want to give the person who doesn't necessarily have the skills
Mm-hmm.
to just run with a task. But as a leader, you can say, all right, well, what are those skills that they need? And what can I do to support them to help get them there?
Mm-hmm.
And again, to use a sports analogy, thinking about building a deeper bench. So enabling your team to have different types of skills so that they can collectively grow, but they can
Mm-hmm.
also fill in where needed. You're not always relying on one person to do a particular task. You can have other people jump in and provide backup behaviors. And we see that as another really strong predictor of high performing teams, is when you have people who are able to flex, adapt, but provide those backups for other people on the team.
Mm. Let's say that the team that you're leading is filled with a lot of alphas, both women or men. And there's a lot of intellectual power. They're also very skilled. Maybe they've been doing what they've been doing for a while, and you inherit this group. And maybe the outside observation might be that there's a lot of ego, or there's a lot of like, this is my lane. I've been doing this long before you got here, leader. So I don't need that, right? Like, how would that process go? Like, how would you, or maybe how would you suggest someone, like handle that situation?
Yeah, well, I would say that it actually reminds me of what we do around change management.
Mm,
So if you're coming
yeah.
into a new team, the first thing you want to do is understand where people are coming from. And so many times leaders come in and want to put their mark. So we're
Yes.
going to do this differently, right? I'm going to turn this team around. We're going to be better. We're going to be more efficient. And what happens most of the time is that some new things are enacted. And then 2 months, 3 months down the road, we're not doing those things anymore. And so what team members decide is, let's just let James figure out, let's let him do his thing. And in 3 months, we'll be back to doing it the way we wanted to, right? But what happens there is that's when leaders just come in and just try to shove something down your throat.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it comes back to this understanding who's there. And a lot of times these changes we see when leaders come in, the team members responding, they're wondering, where do I fall into this new hierarchy? Or am I going to have the same status? And so many times, all of these maybe alpha moves that we see present are
Mm-hmm.
really stemming from people feeling a fear of, what can I lose? Right? What's going to be different? Is my job going to change? Are my
Mm.
relationships going to change? And so people are concerned about, what am I not going to have? And so by listening, we can understand, hey, what's your role in the team? What have you been doing? Oh, that's great. And learning about it from everyone, hearing before you actually make any changes. And listening for a good period of time, right? You don't want to do a listening tour for a day, but you want to look, you want to observe, you want to listen.
Mm. And in the understanding phase of the change management, what have you found to be some very unique, powerful questions that have given you or the leaders you study the answers that they need to make the necessary moves?
So I would say you don't want to just ask one word questions, or questions that are going to elicit a simple yes, no.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be asking the whys, right? Why are we doing things in this manner? How are we doing? Can you explain? Asking a lot to hear from others. And I would say, if you think about conversations you'd have with your team, and I've used this phrase before, participation quotient, right? So you look at, there's 100% of the time that's going to be taken in a conversation. Your time as a leader, when you're listening to gather more information, should be about 10%, 20%, and the rest of the time needs to be from that other person. We also know from social psychology that people feel better in conversations when they carry more of that weight, when they are speaking for a longer period of time, because they get to share their insights, and they're going to walk away from that conversation feeling much better than if it was flipped and the leader did 80% of the talking and the team member did 20%.
Got it. That makes sense. I've always been a listener, probably because my dad was a talker. So naturally that like combination helped me, I guess. But I do notice, and I have noticed in the past, and we didn't necessarily talk about anything in our conversation, like of depth, but people are like, I feel really good. And they were doing like probably 70 to 80% of the talking.
Right.
So
So
fascinating.
so the way things are going so far, I'll probably walk away from this feeling a whole lot better, and you're going to feel like this was a train wreck.
No, definitely not. No, not a train wreck. It's going to be a success. Okay, cool. So change management, awesome. What components have you found in your studies of high performing teams to be like, if you like fundamentals, like if I have a team and they're performing really well, how do I know that they're high performing or if they're just a really solid performing group?
So I think it goes back to this distinction of the long-term versus short-term.
Okay.
Right. And I think you can sometimes feel these things in your team as well. Right.
Yeah.
You can walk into the room and you just kind of feel, yeah, things are going well, or it can feel pretty heavy. And that gets back to your question. Okay, it's a feeling, but how do you quantify that? And so I really encourage teams to not just look at their bottom line performance, but to look at these other kinds of performance metrics, like how satisfied are your team members? How committed are they? And another one I've been using more recently is enthusiasm for teaming, right? How excited are you to be a part of the team? Because we know that excitement can build on itself. We have these positive performance spirals. So you feel really great and you go into the next task and that's just going to continue there. So looking at some of these more behavioral metrics. And I encourage people to put them into performance reviews as well. But the key there is to create some kind of quantifiability to it so that you can track it over time. It's easy to track the numbers, but a lot harder to track the behaviors.
Something interesting that you cited in one of your podcasts was this research out of Carnegie Mellon with the gender, like having gender be a part of the teams. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So we can look at gender from a number of different perspectives, right? And so gender composition, we know, impacts how people feel. And now I study leadership from an informal process a lot. So yes, the formally appointed leader, but also how do people from within the team step up to lead? Because more and more we see that when that happens, that actually encourages a lot more higher levels of performance. And so gender can be tricky, right? The way that we look at it. So typically, females are a little bit less likely to step into leadership roles, which is something that we see throughout the life cycle. So from early on in childhood, if you have a girl who stands up, they're bossy. But if you have a boy who stands up, they're a leader, they're in charge. And so we have these labels put on people. And if we continue to do that, and we see that a lot in teams, just those words being used, right? So as leaders, we want to encourage others to step up and do things. And so we really need to be very mindful of how we say things and who we're saying them to encourage everyone to step up and lead.
Yeah. And there was another thing that was in that same thing that you said, I wrote it down here, hold on, that teams that had more women or higher social sensitivity were actually more productive teams.
So it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure the specific study there,
Okay.
but there's some interesting work looking at CEOs of organizations and gender, and looking at, is it better or teams more productive if they have a female CEO versus a male CEO? And so that's been done quite often. But what the researchers were really interested in is, does this leader project more feminine qualities or do they project more masculine qualities? So if you have a male leader projecting masculine qualities, is that more effective than a female leader projecting masculine qualities.
Mm.
And what this research actually finds is that male leaders who are able to project more feminine qualities, more communal qualities, caring and understanding, things we would typically see as more feminine, those are the leaders that are doing better, that are seeing their teams and their
Wow.
organizations performing at a higher level, which actually is a little bit, it goes against what we typically think, that we want the strong, dominant male and that person's going to drive forward and make things happen. But it gets back to what you were saying earlier, that it's not just about the performance number, the numbers,
Right.
but it's about how do you make people feel? And that plays a big role.
Wow. It's interesting because in a lot of my trainings with the leaders, they that I, at least in the trainings that I do, they are I bring out that quality of community, of culture, of understanding, which would fall, I guess, into the more feminine qualities. But it's interesting when you don't use that labeling and you just talk about like connecting with people or understanding people or listening, like that's an easier thing to bite into. And then once they adopt it and they actually see the benefits of that depth of connection with the other person, there's like a loyalty, a trust, a bond there that when times get hard, they don't run, they like double down. And then in that adversity or in that pressure, there's also information that can be shared quickly that can help the business or help the team adjust and not kind of stay stagnant or lose out on an opportunity because the components and the parties and the team members aren't unified. Mm-hmm. So a lot of my training is focused on like you as a leader need to be, or at least practice these exercises where you know your people, and it goes to like what you're saying, but like I'm finding a different way of looking at it through your answers, but it's so true. And I'm glad that like the research is showing that, because I think more male leaders need to understand that being a leader is a harmonious position, meaning that one-sided way of doing it is not the best way.
No, well, and I mean, if we go back to where leadership came from, right? Leadership was this thing that we invented as humans. It's not something that just like, grows. So leadership started from way back in the Industrial Revolution when we had to get things done. There needed to be a clear command and control system. At the time, we were building a railroad system. And so it was, here, this is what you need to do, put this piece here, and you put this piece here. But we're not doing a lot of that work today. We're doing more knowledge work where we require people to think and be innovative. And the way to do that is to not box someone in and tell them exactly what needs to get done, but to give them the latitude and the freedom. And this is where empowerment comes in. When we give them that, then we're able to do things at a higher level. But if we ascribe to the command and control system all the time, now there are certainly places where it works, right? The military, for example, is a place where we have clear lines of command, control, communication. But even there, we're seeing evidence that having the ability for your people to feel some level of ownership, right, it is meaningful and it helps. And so we need to think beyond where leadership started. And we need to think, well, where are we today? And today we need people who can bring their knowledge to the forefront, and we need to empower those people to do it.
Yeah. Who do you look to in the public or just maybe in history as a leader who gets what you're talking about and is doing it effectively, that maybe myself or anyone listening can kind of look at it, maybe model and do their own research on their own time?
Yeah, so the name is escaping me now, but we can look it up. Home improvement stores, right? We think about, in particular, I'll take Home Depot, for example. I was just there trying to pick up some things to do some work outside. So there was a strict system a while back of you buy some kind of tool there, you don't need it, they're going to question you to death on why you don't need it, and they're going to give you a hard time returning it, right? And we know that contractors and so forth, they buy extra things and they need to be able to take them back. And so over time, they felt like they were getting a control on their system by saying, if you bought it, you got to keep it unless there's a clear reason to do it. And our employees have to follow this strict protocol we have in order to make sure that we meet all of our metrics. What they saw was declining sales over time, and they weren't doing so well. And they found that it was because when someone came to return something, that they were being questioned a ton. And even if it were to go through, the person then had to call over a manager to bring over the key and unlock the register and put in their code. And it just was a lot of red tape to get through and do something very simple. So they changed the way they did things. And they said, we need to empower our employees more. We need to allow them to make the decision. So they trained all of their frontline employees and everyone that you see on the floor. And if you go in there now, you may even still see they wear buttons that say, I am empowered. So that when you come in and you want to return your cable, they'll say, yeah, sure, no problem. And they'll do it right there, and they don't have to call over a manager, and no questions asked. They found that taking that and allowing their employees to give advice, right? We can help you with this, so come talk to us. And the employees are able to give that advice freely. They found that that actually helped to improve their sales tremendously. It improved customer loyalty, customer commitment. All of those things happen from simply leadership making the decision to empower the people who are making, hundreds of transactions every day.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. It's funny when I know that just when I had a very brief experience with me working in corporate America, like the more I felt trusted by my supervisor or by my leader, like I was able to explore, I was able to take more risks. I was able to initiate more of my own creativity. And through that, I found my own style that then made me more successful than following a cookie cutter program. And I just felt I enjoyed coming to work more because I was like, I get to have some self-expression here rather than just like this, mundane, every day is the same kind of experience. So I love that you gave that example because I feel that personally from my own past work history.
Yeah, I think it's so incredibly powerful. And the empowerment piece is something that I would say, if you're a leader looking to create a high performing team, that is one of the key pieces of it, that you need to think about how you can engage and empower your employees, because all of that effort is really going to pay dividends in the end.
Mm-hmm. Has there ever been a time where you were working with like a Fortune 500 company or something and you were talking about all this and you deployed like this strategy and you were nervous that maybe it didn't click right away or things didn't hit as fast as you would like, and you're like, maybe I must have missed something, or maybe they didn't listen to me the right way?
Well, I mean, what's so hard about what we do is that you don't see these results right away.
Right.
And so if you call someone up 2 weeks later and you say, how are things going? They might still be on the high, but this is something you constantly have to put into your bank.
Yeah.
I will say though that I've worked with some folks who completely just reject this notion that relationships matter. And I saw this in one of the situations working in healthcare. I've done a lot of work in a number of different places working with surgeons in particular, and them saying, all of this stuff is junk. I just need to know how to do my task, and my people need to be behind me, and it doesn't matter how they feel, we just need to get it done. And that's one of the places that I heard that and it just didn't strike me right. There's got to be a way, even within a highly structured situation, to that the relationships matter. And so I've done a lot of research in this area to almost, and maybe this is selfish on my part, but to kind of disprove that, to say, no, here's the evidence why we should be focusing on relationships and focusing on people.
Yeah. Well, so I'm curious. Tell me more about this surgical research, because that is a very high stakes kind of like, you can, emotion is present, but the logic needs to supersede that. And it's like, okay, we all have one mission to save this person's life. I don't have time for you to wonder if I care about you or whatever. But at the same time, there needs to be a certain level of trust to exchange that information quickly and not have tension or feuds that may slow down that process in something so immediate as saving someone's life.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, I have lots of stories in this area. But I'll start with some cool findings we had from a research project, and happy to tell more. But one of the things I heard was, I like to work with the same people all the time because they know what I do, right? I want to build a team so that, in this particular case, I want to work with the same scrub tech and the same circulator nurse, and because they're going to know what I need. And we see a lot of leaders do that too. They want to bring people in that they have a lot of experience with. Right? Maybe you worked in a different position with them or a different organization, and you're pulling them in because you know them. So we looked to see, all right, this could make a big difference. Staffing is difficult. We don't always get to work with the same people because everyone's on different shifts. So we looked at this, and we looked across different kinds of tasks that they were doing. Routine procedures like you need to take out your appendix or your gallbladder, to something much more complex like a AAA. So they were looking, and we looked at these, and we wanted to see how much does shared experience matter for performance. In this case, performance, we looked at how much time they were using in the operating room, so their utilization. But we also looked at other things that were a little bit more distal, like how long the patient was staying in the hospital. What was the instance of errors, their recovery rate. And so what we found was that for routine tasks, that their shared experience together as a team mattered to a point. So they were able to gain efficiencies, but at some point that positive trajectory started dipping off. And so we saw really highly experienced teams collectively seeing longer times in the OR, seeing patients who are staying longer in the hospital. And all of this translates into tons of money for the hospitals.
Yeah.
And so we needed to find out, well, why is this? Why are we not just seeing this complete linear trajectory? And in interviews with some of these members, we saw that it was basically complacency. The same thing that was implicated in, the Challenger disaster and other things. People just got really comfortable and just assumed that things were going to happen, and, saw, oh, it's just another appendectomy. It's just another, gallbladder removal, and not looking at the particulars of the case, or not looking at who's on the team and maybe the different nuances, right? You have a tall surgeon versus a shorter surgeon. That changes the positioning of the table in the room, right? Really small things, but those small things made a big difference. And so what we're recommending is training around just situational awareness, right? Are there things that we can do to ward off that complacency, to kind of jolt the system, right? And so I encourage a lot of teams that, hey, yeah, build up these efficiencies with the people that you have. The more you get to know them, that's great. But don't get too comfortable where it starts to tail off, right? So build in uncomfortableness. Throw someone new on the team. Do something that makes sense to jolt the system, to basically keep your eyes open so you don't veer off the side of the cliff.
I love that. Was there an average time that you found that was like that this amount of time usually leads to complacency? Like maybe this team's been together for 6 months, and right around 5-6 months, that's when they started, I don't want lazy, but like they started like not thinking as deeply, or they just kind of just went with the flow more rather than being more intentional. Like, have you seen a time span?
Nothing in particular. And that was something we were hoping to see was, hey, at the 5-month mark, right? And so that's where we know we can do it. Nothing really that specific, but I think that's something, to look into. And there might be cycles in the workflow where if you're going for a longer period of time, have these, what's, project teams call gateway reviews, right? Put these things in and give yourself a predetermined time where you're going to stop and say, hey, let's take stock of what we're doing here. Why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
It's a great time to, reevaluate, to play devil's advocate, to make sure that you're not in too far over your heads, right? Sometimes we just kind of keep the ball rolling down the field and we don't realize the ball is about to roll off a cliff. We need to take stock. And so having these times or having someone else come in, sometimes I've said, bring in another expert because they're uninvested. When we get invested in our work, we tend to, we have rose-colored glasses on sometimes. And so if you bring someone else in, hey, that's a great opportunity to say, we're going this way, we should be going this other way.
How many leaders do you think have that level of perspective when knowing that a new message or a new leader or a new expert needs to come in? Because what I imagine happens is like, it's working, so let's just keep doing it. And if we take it out, then we might mess up the momentum that we have. Or if we egotistically, maybe like that person doesn't know as much as this person, or I don't like the way they see certain things, so I don't want my team to be exposed to that because I want to keep it, a certain way. Have you seen any percentages of like that?
No percentages, but what I would say is that those leaders tend to be a little bit lower on emotional intelligence.
Got it.
All right. The other thing too is, and this is one of the things that I encourage leaders to think about, is that you can be, feeling comfortable is great. We don't like to feel uncomfortable, or we don't like to feel like we don't know everything.
Right.
But really, the cool thing about teams is that you get to work with different people, right? And some of the best teams are so incredibly diverse that, I know for me, when I put together a research team and working with others, I like to put people together that have different skills than I do. And I know very well if there's going to be someone on the team that could school me on something else. But I'm fine with that, because that means then they can take us further than I could alone, or than the rest of my team could alone. And so I think that leaders need to understand that it's okay to be the leader and not know everything. And in fact, that's one of the things that enables trust, right? If you come in and tell me as a leader that you know everything, you know no wrong, you are perfect, you're a genius, I'm not going to believe you, right? And I'm going to look for ways of picking that out. And it's just going to reduce the trust on the team. Right? One of the key facets is owning your mistakes and owning your limitations.
So I think there's a myth there, and I know that I've felt it at times too. And it's like, I get that it's okay to be a leader and not know everything, but maybe someone's thought might be, are they going to want to, and maybe this is, I don't know, this is just the lens that I'm currently thinking it through based off my current experience with all the people that I have worked with. It's like, why would they want to follow me if I don't know what I think I should know? So then that may prevent them from recruiting or from entering a position that they would be really good at. But that thought of, I have to know more in order to be there, kind of gets in the way.
Yeah, and getting back to your gender question as well, I've heard this a lot from women leaders.
Yeah.
Right, because they don't want to look like they don't know, because it's already a strike against them, they see. I think the advice I usually give is to be upfront, right? And to get away from this command and control, being directive, but a leader who can demonstrate that they're a team player and that they want to hear from you, right? And understanding, hey, I know, James, what you bring to the table, or I want to learn the different skills that you have, because I know that, I can't do this alone. I can do this with your help. I can do this with the help of our team. And together we can do some really awesome stuff. But there's not one person who can do it, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm here as a leader to help guide, to help one of the roles of a leader is to provide access to resources, right? If our team needs something, I'm going to go to bat for you. Right? Team members need to see those things. To use another sports analogy, it's the baseball coach that goes out and argues balls and strikes. The umpire is not going to change his call, but the coach goes out there, or the manager goes out there to do that, to show the team, hey, I've got your back. So all of these relationship pieces can really make a big difference, and actually can help to maybe paint over some things that you don't know as a leader. If you set that stage, if you come in saying that you know everything, people are going to expect that. And when you don't, they're going to call you out on it. But if you go in right away and create that team environment, I'm here, we're here together, it makes a big difference.
Is there, I imagine that is there a baseline of certain skills, knowledge, or attitude that someone needs to have in order to claim or take that leadership position? Because it's like, if you're not, let's just say if you're a person that's wanting to grow up in the company that you're in, but you don't necessarily produce numbers, you're not very relatable or personable, so you don't really build relationships, that person's not going to be, a leader. I assume. Whereas someone who may not be the highest performer, but does put up consistent numbers, and it has a lot of social capital, like that person may be more equipped to be that leader. So like, what would you say are the fundamentals? Like if you want to access that level of leadership, what do you have to like make sure, or at least be mindful of, that you have in place in order for people to be like, you know what, I like you, I'm willing to follow you or be alongside you on this journey?
Yeah. As you were talking through all of that, I was just thinking, two things came to mind. One was trust, and the other are what we call team generic skills. And so we tend to look at it, and a lot of places that do personality tests to hire look at individual differences, like personality differences, right? Are you extroverted or introverted? Are you conscientious? Are you agreeable? Those things are good, right? They tell us something about the person and how they're going to respond. But it also matters, the more that, especially the more that organizations shift towards more team-based work, and we see a whole lot of that being done. We want people who carry team generic capabilities, that you're going to be successful and you want to work in a team environment, right? So I need to know, are you more of an individual contributor, or do you work better in a team environment? Are you collaborative, right? Do you have emotional intelligence, right? So emotional intelligence is this ability to be able to recognize emotions within yourself, but also in others. And that's one of the greatest predictors of leadership effectiveness is emotional intelligence. And so we need to learn to grow that. But again, that's not something that you can just go through, a one-day program and you're all better. But it requires constant coaching, constant reflection, returning to that development plan that you're writing, or you're making, or working with someone to develop, and doing that on a consistent basis. And going back to the book that I shared earlier, building habits, right, around having those really emotionally intelligent conversations and perspectives.
Okay, awesome. You made me think of something. I'm John. Oh, here we go. Recruiting. And I know you kind of given some really strong outlines, but let's just use the research example. Like when you were like, okay, I'm going to do this research, I need a team. What was the what was your framework that you used? How did you decide how many people you needed? How did you decide who you wanted on that team? How did you reach out to them? How long did that process take? And then what was the ultimate outcome? Was it a successful research team? What was a good, better, how maybe of all of that? I think that would give some good insight as to maybe what other people who are thinking about creating a team in whatever way can use and borrow from yours.
Yeah, I would say that the number one piece is work ethic. Okay. So I look for people who are going to run as fast as I can run, right? Who are committed to what it is they're doing, that they're passionate about work, that they're willing to question too. Like one of my favorite collaborators, and I know she's one of yours as well, she challenges me all the time to think about things in a different way, and is not afraid to bring up a different perspective. And I think that's so important. The folks I've worked with where we talk about things, but it's more one directional and it's just, okay, what do I need to get done? Those just aren't satisfying projects. Before I even got into academics, I was a coach and I'd go out recruiting players. And one of the things that I learned was, yes, there are certain skills that your players need to have.
Right.
And there are some, in my mind, it was softball. So I'd see a fatal flaw in a hitting, in their hitting mechanics. And I'd say, that one's going to be hard to break. But more so than those technical skills, I looked for a lot of the intangibles. So these were high school students. Was the high school student, were their parents carrying their bat bag for them? Were they yelling to their parent to go to the stand and grab them Gatorade all the time? Right? Were they just very needy? I looked at how they would interact with the coaches, with the other players. Were they, when the coach was trying to give them a pep talk or talk through a play that just happened, are they looking at the coach in the eye or are they drifting around? And if I saw those intangibles there, all these really positive behaviors, I would actively pursue that player because I knew that that person was coachable, was going to be a great team member, and was going to help us do what we needed, that we could teach some of the other technical things. But if you don't have those intangibles, it's much harder. And honestly, a great player with great technical skills, I would pass up if they didn't have a great attitude.
And I believe that's amazing and incredible. And I do the same exact thing, but just in slightly different in my own context. That is a trainable skill, right? The skill of observation. Do you think, so do you agree that that is a trainable thing? And then do you also believe that is that a gift to be able to recognize quote unquote talent? Or is it more so just you've been around talent for so often or so long that you just develop pattern recognition and can pick up on it right away?
It's probably a little bit of both. I think that it does take time. And this was actually one of the things that I was fortunate to work with a great coach who would talk to me about. Here's the kind of things we wanted to look for. Because as a young coach, I was like, we just want the best player, the one who can hit it the furthest, right? And can make the awesome play. But then you get into your first season and you say, oh, look, these players who don't really have the intangibles, they're bringing down the team and we're not able to do it. And so I think it takes some training, right, to be able to see it. And even better than that, experience, right? Think back to the teams that you had that were just awful, or the leaders that you worked for that made you feel terrible. What were those things that they were doing? And what can you look for instead? What would you have rather that person have, right? And so sometimes it's looking back on what we've experienced ourselves. And that gets us back into that feeling, into that mindset. And that can make it easier then to observe and see those in others.
Do you see a difference between understanding and empathy? And if so, what is the difference?
So that's a really good question. I'm trying to think through what the difference means for me. For me, empathy, and I know that you have a young one at home, and so it keeps coming back to this episode from Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, where he says, think about what someone else is feeling. And that song just sticks in my head. That's empathy, right? It's what is the other person feeling, and can you feel that too, right? I can understand where you're coming from, and I can understand that you have a different perspective, but do I actually feel what you're feeling? I think for me, that's the difference. I'm actually curious if you see a difference in what it means to you.
Yeah. So empathy to me now, so I'll just use me being a dad, right? So before, when I would look at parents, I would understand that that has to be different. Like your life is, you're responsible for a child that's completely dependent upon you. And sometimes you have single parents, or sometimes you have two parents that work and can't necessarily stay home. So now they got to pay for daycare, and then they got to worry about all of that. And, it sounded like a lot. And I got that intellectually. But once I had a baby, I was like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? Like, it was just like, I can't imagine. Like, I'm fortunate enough to have Amanda stay at home and take care of Aiden while I do stuff like this. And I know how much that means to me. And I already know how hard that is. I can't imagine doing it alone, or having to rely on someone that I don't know to raise my child if I don't have a support system where I live. Like that empathy there now helps me take a deep breath when interviews get rescheduled, or clients have to reschedule, or plans fall off and they don't go according to what I thought was going to happen. And so I'm much more like, yeah, I mean, I get it. If that happened to me, I would probably be saying the same thing. And that level of empathy saves me emotional turmoil. And then it also prevents the judgment of, well, just figure it out, man. And like, just
Right.
really taking that back and taking a deep breath. And then that person doesn't feel as judged or attacked. And so that relationship kind of doesn't suffer an unnecessary emotional burden from one or both parties, all because of my understanding of that person's situation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The more that we can feel and experience, that just makes us better people. It makes us better listeners, right? And I think that's the key to really to understanding that is to listen to others and not just hear what they're doing, but really, how does it make you feel?
Yeah.
And that can be a tough place for a leader to be in, right? You don't want to necessarily pry. You don't want to be their therapist, but you have to understand and even further be able to empathize with what that person's going through.
Yeah. And I also think there's a component of understanding your own emotions and know how to process it for you. Because if you are emotionally numbing or distracting or purposely avoiding your own internal, situation, then when someone else presents something that you may be going through, but you haven't necessarily done the work on yourself to understand it, even though you're in a similar situation, I don't know if that empathy can be there because of the level of awareness of which you have of your own situation. So you mentioned reflection earlier. I think there's not enough reflection that people are going through. Like, there needs to be a certain amount of time, daily or weekly, where you analyze what you've been doing, what you've been feeling. And through that, you can begin to see patterns. You can see where you slip up or where you double down and it ends up being a success. And that is your formula for a better quality life, or a more sustainable business, or a deep, loving relationship. There's patterns in the things that we do. And if you don't understand the patterns, then you're unconscious in your ability to produce results. And if you want to be a leader and lead other people to what you feel they should be led to, or what they want to be led to, if you're not aware of the process in which you get there, you can't help them.
You're so right. And that's not an easy thing to do.
It's not.
But that, James, is the key to just being a leader and being a great leader, right? Is having that self-awareness. I'll take it to teams. We tell teams to debrief, right?
Yes.
After action reviews, postmortems, whatever you want to call them. We say after something happens, reflect on what went well, what didn't go so well, and what are you going to do differently. We don't always debrief ourselves. And it's hard because it's hard to see ourselves, right? We don't know. And so getting that feedback, having an objective person give us that feedback is so critical. And it's a lot of work because it's sitting and reflecting. And I've heard times from people where they say, I don't have time to just sit and reflect. And I know, James, you shared with my class earlier about meditation. And that was so incredible. And it actually helped so many of my students where they came back later and said, I meditated and it's changed my life.
Wow.
And they thought that they didn't have it in them. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't have the time. But there's so many things like working on yourself as a leader, as a human being on your teams. If you don't take the time and make the time to do these things that might not seem like they make a big difference, they do make a huge difference. And it's so worth the time investment. And if more people could see that, and I know that's a lot of what you do, and that's why I love what you do, because it's all take that time for yourself and really develop who you are.
Yeah. So true. Thank you. I'm glad that the effect on the meditation has been a hit, because it's changed my life entirely. And that time is hard because you have to admit things about you that you may not want to admit. And, you have to identify some failures that didn't go according to plan. And then you also have to be patient with yourself and be able to sit in uncomfortable emotions. And that's challenging. But the upside to all of that is that you can recognize a problem early enough before it becomes a catastrophe, just a complete devastation of the culture. You can become a more well-balanced, fine-tuned communicator, which not only allows you to articulate who you are, but understand who someone else is, and create an affinity that helps you and that person get to the destination that both of you agree upon. And then because you've worked through a lot of, I always have this imagery of clogged pipes, and the goal for me is to clear the pipes, right? And so if I have a clear pipe, everything's flowing through, then I feel better, I do better. I don't have so much noise going on in my mind. Mm-hmm. And the less noise I have, the more resources, the more bandwidth, the more level of service I have that I can dedicate towards someone else and really create that impact. And that's what I care about the most. Out of my values, my top 5 values, presence is my first one, impact is my second one, and third is integrity. So those 3 values are guiding everything that I do. How can I be more present? And how can, through that presence, can I create more impact? Well, how present are you with yourself? Because if you want to be present with other people, if you can't do it with yourself, it's going to be very, very challenging.
I love that. Presence is so big. There's so many other things going on, right? We've got our phones, and while we're doing this talk, my daughter just came in, right? And I'm shooing her away and doing all sorts of things. And but to be in the moment, right? Be where your feet are. And if you're thinking about something else, you're not taking in what's in front of you. And there's so much great in front of us that often we don't see because our mind is someplace else. And that's an incredible skill to have as a leader. But like you said too, you have to understand yourself and be able to help and support yourself before you can do that for others.
So true. What do you have any rituals or habits or pre-speech or pre-class routines that set you up for either being present or just being in a state where you feel you can deliver what you want to deliver?
So I'd say this is a work in progress for me, right? This is something that I'm always trying to find. What can I do to be better?
Yeah.
And so one of the things is I'm trying to be better for myself, especially when this pandemic first hit, and things just seemed to be blowing up all over the place, and my calendar was more full than it ever was. And I sacrificed the time I normally had to take care of myself and go for a run. Or to spend some time in the evening to, play Legos or do something like that. And I would take a work call just to keep up with what was going on. And eventually that caught up with me, and I realized I can't do that I need to block time on my calendar. And that's how I do it. I take time in the morning, and that is time for me. And that is time that I will go and work out, or that is time now I'll help my daughter with her schoolwork. Do something, but that is really protected time. And it's and I really fight off others to take that time because that's what I need to do. I will say sometimes before, and this is probably, I was an athlete in the past, and so sometimes as I'm driving someplace to go give a talk or to do something, I'll play whatever song is getting me fired up at the time, and and I'll blast it in my car, and it reminds me of sitting on the bus with my headphones on, waiting for a game. But it's that time that emotionally just gets me really charged up and ready to go. And especially, early mornings, if I'm not really feeling it, I throw on some music, and it just helps. Not all the time. Sometimes I just need to clear my head, but oftentimes it does its trick.
Yeah, music is underrated, not talked about enough strategy to get yourself into a emotional state. Like I use music for everything. All my events are curated playlists. I have named playlists for the types of moods that I want to be in, like chill. I have a sexual playlist. I have like a meditation play. Like everything that I want to experience is all curated in a specific song list. And I do that all the time. So I'm glad that you said that. And going back to like the athlete analogy, like 100%. That's the pregame, right? It's like going through your motions, visualizing, but you have music with you all the time. So I definitely relate to that. This past weekend, I had a mastermind program that I do where, entrepreneurs and business people from all over the country come to Vegas for a weekend, and we go through everything from personal life to business life in order for them to live a more high quality life, if you will. And what I noticed this week, my intention going into it was I had the structure, I had it all laid out, but my intention was to go with the flow. Because sometimes I can get so regimented that I don't leave space for miracles to happen. And, miracles have this like kind of nebulous religious tone, but what I consider a miracle is really just noticing information in the present moment that you don't normally pick up on because you're not there. And through picking up on those signals, whether they're unconscious or conscious, can lead to powerful conversations, breakthroughs mentally, emotionally, or just looking at someone a certain way that makes them feel a certain thing that then changes the trajectory of what actions they take. And this is Tuesday today, Sunday, we did a meditation early in the morning. Right after that meditation, about 15-20 minutes, that's when I call them downloads, like this internal voice just said, go grab that one person in the group and sit with them one-on-one and go through a certain experience. And it was literally like a whisper. And it was a whisper that I hear a lot, but I only hear it when I'm clear. When I'm messy and things are busy, it's not there. And so after meditation, I was just in this Zen mindset, right? And it was just like, go grab her, sit there and talk about this. And I was like, that's weird. Okay.
That's awesome.
Right. So then I go over to her and I say, hey, can we borrow for a second? And then we sit down literally for 15-20 minutes. And that was one of the most powerful breakthroughs of the whole weekend. And it was something that was it was an intuitive nudge that if I wasn't clear, I would have dismissed, or I probably wouldn't even heard it. But because I was clear, I was able to act on it. And then that led to a moment that this person's going to remember for a long time, if not for the rest of her life. Mm-hmm. That's one situation.
Wow.
So another one, fast forward to that afternoon. We did this movement thing where we're moving our bodies and releasing like this tension that we all have, because we always move in very specific directions, but moving dynamically can open up parts of your body that don't normally get expressed. So we do that. And I'm like, again, I get into that zone again where I'm like, it's like a tunnel vision. Everything's quiet. And it was like, go grab this person, tell them to sit in this circle and do this exercise. And it was literally like,
oh, you're giving me goosebumps.
I'm sitting there. I'm like, really? Like, dude, but why? Like, it's not in the curriculum. It's not in the right. structure that I laid out. And it's like, don't worry about that. Just go grab him. So I called his name. I put him in the circle. We did this exercise. And that exercise was the staple of the whole weekend. If that exercise didn't happen, then everything that happened before and after that experience for me wouldn't have been worth it over the weekend. and it just seamlessly pieced it all together. But it was an intuitive thing that wasn't planned, and I was open enough to receive it, and then I had the courage and the self-belief to act on it.
Wow. I mean, that is so powerful, because it's these unscripted moments.
Yes.
And it happens so often. But like you said, being open to it, that's what allowed you to do it. But then you can think it, but
Right.
then to act and trust yourself to do it. Right. And that's where the experience comes in, and
Yeah.
having that clarity of mind to just know, hey, I'm going to go with this. And there might be 100 times that you do it, and maybe, 99 of them work out, and one is, well, that wasn't the breakthrough I thought, but it, to trust yourself enough to do that, and to listen to that voice, because that voice comes from your experience, all of your hard work that you've put in to recognize a situation in the
Yes.
moment and say, something needs to be different. Okay, I'm going to do it. Because if you wait 10 seconds, 30 seconds, you may have lost your moment. And so to have that, I don't know if it's a risk-taking behavior, or if it's
Yeah.
what that is. Like, do you see it as taking a risk, or do you see it as a calculated risk? How do you view
Yeah, it's
something like
super
that?
interesting. So like I love the fact that you pointed out that my body and my mind, through how long I've been doing this and how much I care about this and how much time I've put into it, I've built a skill, whether I realize it or not, of observing certain things, whether it's the way someone smiles or the way they use their body or the type of question that they ask or where they sit in a room or how they walk into a room. Like I've studied that, and I'm not always aware that I'm recognizing it. But when I get those nudges, I know that I'm recognizing it after the fact. In the
Right.
moment, it's happening so quick that I don't think that I'm aware of it. But I'm aware of the voice that comes through that says, do this. And so in that moment, I'm like, okay, that's a different voice than my everyday kind of normal go through the motions voice. So there's a uniqueness to it. And then when it comes in, there's like there's a momentary maybe fear of like, well, I don't want to mess up what I planned for. Like I
Right.
planned for this weekend. I planned for them to have this type of experience. So then I would be letting go of all of that on a whim. Like I
Right.
put hours and hours and hours into this structure because I believe that this was the right way. And in one moment, it was like, nope, nah, dude,
Right.
that isn't it. And I'm like, so then I think that's where the risk comes in, and the fear of like, if it doesn't work out, then I feel like I failed them, and their perception may not be that they got what they paid for. Right. So then there's the risk, but then it's like, it was so strong, but so subtle. It was like, I didn't have an option.
Right.
And the longer I listened to it, the more I was like, go.
Just do it. Well, and I think that's where the reflection comes in too, right? Because you can reflect after that point on what you did and the move you made. Like you said, you're not thinking about it in the moment to know that's what it is, but you are confirming with yourself that, hey, acting on that nudge, that was good. Keep doing it, right? So it's that positive self-talk, or maybe the nudge didn't work, right? Which I'm sure that's not often, because you're coming from such a clear place in your mind. But having that positive reinforcement too can help. I mean, there are plenty of times too where I've been in the classroom and you have a certain amount of time and you're like, this is what I need to cover. But this really awesome question was just asked, and I can either go down this rabbit hole or I can pull it back. Is everyone going to like the rabbit hole I'm going down it? You're making these calculations, but you decide what to do. And you hope that it works out well. And usually it does, because then it comes from a place where people want that, right?
Yes.
It doesn't feel so scripted. But it's
100%.
but you need to be scripted to be prepared. And like what we were talking about in the beginning, right? Leaders who prepare are the most effective, right? You got to come into every situation and know what it is that you're going to do, know your people. But at the same time, you have to be ready to pivot on a dime and be adaptable. Which that is a hard.
That's so frustrating. It's like, plan so long for this and just know that when you get into the room, you may not talk about any of it.
Yeah.
So they'd be like, well, then why even plan? Like someone would be like, well, why even plan? Because I'm gonna put all this time and then it might change. But it's like the conviction and the clarity that comes from having a plan gets you into an emotionally resourceful state so that you can pivot. Because if you
Absolutely.
walked in there with no context, then you wouldn't really know where to pivot because there was no prep work involved, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's this really interesting just amalgamation of these things. But I mean, that perspective though, to look at all that prep time that you spent for this past weekend, you could either look at that as what a waste because I should have just done this other thing, or it was the preparation that got you to the place to give you that opportunity to make that pivot. And that and it's the mindset. It's how you reflect on the situation, how you look at it in the moment. And you're such an incredibly, positive, optimistic person. You're just very clear-minded. And I think to have that allows the opportunity to pivot, but it's not like you just became this overnight or other
Right.
people become that overnight. It is a ton of work.
Yeah. Thank you. And there's a quote that I love, that you get rewarded in public for what you do in private.
Love it.
So it's really true. It's the work that you're doing that no one sees that makes the difference when everyone's watching.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. As we wind down here, this has been incredible. I know I've learned so much, framework wise, labeling wise, just examples, and it's been so tangible for me. What else do you think we need to touch on before we close out that maybe leaders need to know, understand, or at least think about if they want to go to the next level in their business or their life or relationships?
I think it just comes back to the theme that we've been talking about, is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? So we need to ward off complacency in our teams. We need to throw some discomfort in there, throw some jolts in the system. We have to be prepared to pivot, right? And to make moves. But the way we can get to ourselves to a place where we're making good decisions and trusting our instincts and having those voices that are leading us in the right direction is to put in the work, to be reflective. And we want to reflect with our teams, but we want to reflect with ourselves. And I encourage everyone to have a plan, but to know that you could rip up that plan too, right? As you maybe get laid off from a job, or you're taking a new position, or you've never been a leader before and now you're in a leadership position, and what are you going to do? To keep record of those things that you've looked to develop within yourself, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Feedback is always this thing. We want to be better, but feedback tells us how we're not so good. Right. So it kind of sits at this weird intersection.
Right.
But we have to be open to hear that feedback and willing to put in the effort and the work to get ourselves into a better place. It's just this stuff is so much fun. I mean, I can talk about leadership and teams all day long. And I think the more that people realize that the relationships for themselves and for others matter, that's what takes you from just being that leader that gets the work done to being the leader that everyone respects, wants to work for, and has long-term success.
Okay. You initiated one last question based off what you just said. So when asking for feedback or asking for help, let's say, I'm borrowing Pael, our mutual friend's language here, with power dynamics and also with social capital. When someone asks for help, in your perspective, do you sense that the person's asking for help may feel that if I have to ask for help, I'm lower on the hierarchy. I'm of less status because I can't figure it out on my own and I need somebody else to help me with it. So therefore, because I feel less than when I ask for help, I won't ask for help.
I think that's probably a thing that a lot of us feel, right? Where it's always, do we want to step out there and essentially tell someone, I don't have the competence or I don't have the understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that so many times that actually, by not asking for help, can compound a situation. But it's all too about the environment that we exist in, right? There are some places where power dynamics are incredibly difficult. There's great power distance between people, and it can make asking for help very difficult if that person you're asking comes back down at you, where we don't have the trust, or we don't have what we call psychological safety, right? This feeling that we can take interpersonal risks and speak up. So it can be a really tricky situation. And I would always look to Pael to share, what do you do in these power dynamic situations?
Right.
But I would say from a leadership perspective, we want to encourage people to ask for help, right? And how do we do that? We can ask for help ourselves as leaders, right? Show good role modeling behavior that we're okay doing that. Asking a team member, for help. It doesn't necessarily just need to be a peer or a boss. Showing that a little bit of that vulnerability, that we can be open and be okay with it. So that role modeling behavior is critical. But if someone does come to ask, thank them for doing that, right? Showing appreciation for them asking for help. And so it's up to us as leaders to create that right kind of environment where you feel comfortable coming the next time around, and you're not going to be put down.
Right.
But if you don't ask for help, right? Let's say someone gives you a project and they're trying to empower you. Go do this, right? And do it on your own. But you might not know what you're doing. Then you waste the next couple weeks or couple days, whatever it is, and you give them a product that's not what it's supposed to be, right? And now you've just wasted all that time, all that effort, all that energy, and it's probably going to be worse in the end by not having just asked for help in the beginning, because now you've delayed things. So thinking about the different kinds of consequences too, and sometimes we just need to swallow our pride and say, gosh, I just don't know. You just told me what to do, James, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. Can you explain it in a different way?
Yeah.
And I think that people do have an appreciation for it, but there are times where doing that is going to be very difficult just because of the power dynamics.
Cool.
So I don't think there's a one size fits all kind of approach.
Yeah.
Or something
Amazing.
like that.
So how do people, if they have any questions, they just want to reach out to you or just connect with you, what was the best way to do that?
Yeah, so my email is probably the best way to get in touch with me, led73@drexel.edu.
Cool.
Happy to answer any questions, have more conversations. Always love to hear and just think through different scenarios.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being a leader in our education program and also outside in the companies and the environments that you work in. I think it's necessary for us to get more of this message out, and appreciate you and your time. And thank you for being on the show.
Oh, absolutely, James. And I appreciate all that you do. You're amazing. Keep doing it.
Thank you.